Well, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate you being here. The New York Times just came out with a poll that shows us leading everywhere by a lot. I think we're probably leading in New Jersey. We had a rally, over 100,000 people this weekend. A lot of the mainstream media didn't want to say how many people. Up here screaming like a lunatic.
But look, he has to win Nikki Haley voters. And they're not necessarily Nikki Haley loyalists to her specifically. Some of them are. But it's, depending on what state you're looking at, maybe 1/5 of Republican voters say they're not comfortable with Trump. They want it to be someone else. They're still voting for her sort of out of protest, even though she's been out of the race for the better part of, 2 months at this point.
Oh, that's gonna hurt.
How did the sayings go again? The truth hurts. The truth will set you free. That's the truth, Ruth.
Yo! Hold up! Time out! And that's the double truth, Ruth.
All things that you rarely associate with Fox News. However, on this occasion, nail meet hammerhead.
Those people are going to be essential to a Trump victory coalition.
Primary, but Nikki Haley attained 16% of the vote. Are you concerned about that number? And what do you say to those voters?
Well, that's a very small number. All of those people are going to come to me.
Well, former President Trump capturing Indiana's Republican nomination Tuesday. Voters in the Hoosier state going to the polls to cast their ballots in the state's presidential and some state primaries. Trump secured 58 GOP delegates. Nikki Haley won nearly 22% of the vote, despite dropping out in March.
It's another week in US politics, which means that the current GOP frontrunner will continue to complain about the temperature of a courtroom. Which, by the way, on that front, how is it possible that Captain Bone Spurs continues to drift off into mid-session siestas if it's that cold?
To the country, I should be out campaigning now instead of sitting in a very cold courthouse all day long.
But of course, he could not wait to jump on the latest New York Times Siena poll, brimming with confidence, as are many in the MAGA contingent, that the historically skewed New York Times polls favor Trump.
Leading in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, and Nevada. Nevada, we are leading actually by 12 points.
I love the Times, Mika. I read the Times every day. And of course, especially because Peter Baker writes for the Times. I want you to take him down after I say this next thing. But the New York Times Siena poll traditionally has consistently slanted toward Donald Trump. And what's so funny is the Times will release their polls. Liberals will run around with their hair on fire for about a month, right? And then 3 days later, polls will come out that will show a deadlocked race, right? If anybody wants to bet me, I can't bet. I don't bet. Betting's for stupid. But if I were a bettor, and if somebody wanted to give me 11 or 12 points, and Biden in Nevada, come on. That race is always close, and Democrats always win the close races, except for the governor. Democrats always win the close race. If anybody out there believes it's a double-digit lead for Donald Trump, you're seriously wake up. And it's the same thing. They're all tied. We can show you polls that show Pennsylvania, Biden ahead, Wisconsin, Biden ahead. Go down the list. But I will tell you, these polls, it's very funny. It's the Times and Siena polls, which always slant for Donald Trump. They put them out, and the political and media class have their hair on fire for weeks.
Acting like last week's Quinnipiac poll just never happened, which I guess is relatively easy for the type of people who would think that this is what an 80,000 person crowd looks like.
The other thing is that there were 100,000 people at this rally on Saturday, not just from New Jersey, but also Pennsylvania, which is a swing state. How about that? And one of them—
That's when I'm not sharing pictures of a Rod Stewart crowd decades ago as a means to try and portray a Trump rally. Their selective memory was called into question on the very network that they usually go to fill up their delusion tank, Fox News of all places, as host Stuart Varney and his guest discussed the elephant in the room, the fact that Nikki Haley continues to garner a large portion of Republican votes despite dropping out of the race over 2 months ago, garnering up to 20% in certain primaries.
But look, he has to win Nikki Haley voters. And they're not necessarily Nikki Haley loyalists to her specifically. Some of them are. But it's, depending on what state you're looking at, maybe 1/5 of Republican voters say they're not comfortable with Trump. They want it to be someone else. They're still voting for her sort of out of protest, even though she's been out of the race for better part of 2 months at this point. Those people are going to be essential to a Trump victory coalition.
Now, while all this was happening, they were holding a primary election in Indiana. Obviously, Trump won on the Republican side because he's the only Republican running. But once again, a lot of votes were cast for Nikki Haley, who dropped out 2 months ago. Nikki Haley disappeared at the beginning of March, and she still took home more than 20% of the vote, which means either a large chunk of Indiana voters are not planning to vote for Trump, or Mike Pence voted 128,000 times.
I think the Nikki Haley factor is real. You look at it, Indiana's a small state. By the way, it's Mike Pence's home state. It's a red state, went for Trump in 2016, went for Trump in 2020, 11 electoral votes, so not a huge number there. But still, if he's missing out on 100,000 votes in a state like that, and then 155,000 in Pennsylvania 2 weeks ago, you can't tell me that he doesn't have a problem with Nikki Haley voting.
And here's the thing I want to discuss, right? How many New York Times articles have we seen on what this means for the current GOP frontrunner? Just imagine for a second Dean Phillips was garnering this amount of votes in a Democratic primary. Can you even begin to process the amount of articles and Fox News coverage and endless stream of how this is actually indicative of Biden's inability to ascend stairs? The double standard is blatant.
I know who I'm not going to vote for.
Who are you?
I will not vote for Donald Trump. I can't associate myself with the Republican Party under Donald Trump. I agree wholeheartedly. The Trump we're seeing now is a completely different Trump than Trump of 2016 and even 2020. He's running a campaign strictly for revenge. I think he poses a clear threat to our democracy, our institution.
You had voted for Trump in the past, though.
Yes.
What was it that turned you away?
2016 Trump, 2020 Trump, 2024 Trump are very different people.
What's different about 2024 Trump?
A lot of people that have worked for him in the past say they won't come back. Obviously, January 6th happened. A lot of indictments have happened. And to be honest with you, I don't know that he wants my vote. Or those of us that supported Nikki Haley has been pretty clear.
You talked about trying to unify the party. How do you bring these Nikki Haley voters, some of whom voted for you in 2020 but say they don't want to now?
Oh, they'll all vote for me.
How do you bring them back into the...
They can all vote for me again. They can all vote for me again, everybody.
Now, I'm not going to say that we shouldn't be concerned at polls, especially ones that show voters having more confidence in Trump's handling of the economy as opposed to Biden. This despite the fact that Trump tripled the national debt while offering tax cuts to the 1%, woefully mismanaged a pandemic to the point that it left the economy in absolute tatters, to which the Biden administration has performed miracles resuscitating.
First of all, you guys are exactly right. Joe's got an unbelievable record of accomplishment.
Stunning.
If you had told me that the unemployment rate after COVID was going to be back down to 4% or lower,
Yeah. Lowest in 50 years, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if you had told me that 15 million jobs would have been created, that wages are higher now than they were pre-pandemic.
Yeah. And the most jobs created in history, correct?
In this 4-year period, yeah.
But if we're going to run around with our hair on fire at every poll, let's report on them fairly, shall we? Let's take into account the fact that moderate Republicans are blatantly distancing themselves from the MAGA contingent and clearly making a statement in doing so. Nikki Haley dropped out and still she is garnering hundreds of thousands of votes.
President Trump easily won the state's primary. However, Nikki Haley, who you know suspended her campaign, still got more than 156,000 votes, nearly 17% among Republicans.
But clearly Trump has still got a Nikki Haley problem. Why hasn't Haley come out and actually endorsed Trump yet?
I would disagree with you on that, Rob. I don't think there's a alleged Nikki Haley problem. Again, a lot of these
I'm
votes,
just basing that on what we saw in Pennsylvania. 17% is a significant percentage of the vote in Pennsylvania for Nikki Haley.
But there are millions and millions of people, more than 100 million people who will vote on November the 5th, and they will determine the election. And there's 6 months to go. Yeah. And there's a great case to be made about why they should vote for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. And the story that the media unfortunately is not covering is that uncontested vote in Pennsylvania. The fact that Joe Biden's base is the one that is actually very fractured. You see these Palestinian protests erupting on college campuses across the country. Jewish Americans are rightfully upset with how Biden has handled killed the war in Israel. You see African Americans moving towards President Trump by historic margins that we've never seen for a Republican candidate before. He is winning Hispanic Americans right now.
Caroline, just quickly, would Trump accept, because 80,000 votes is what decided Biden and Trump in Pennsylvania in 2020. It was 46,000 with Hillary Clinton in 2016.
And let's not pretend that if Biden was running into the same issue, there wouldn't be end-to-end coverage on it. So despite how often Trump downplays it, he has a Nikki Haley problem. And the media needs to report on it fairly.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.